Thank you very much. The battle inside the Beltway heating up, and it is crunch time for Congress to reach a deal on tax hikes and spending cuts. Can a grand bargain be reached by our elected officials? Joining us now is Congressman Ron Paul. Congressman Paul, good to see you. Thanks for coming in. It is the news of the day. We also want to get into a little monetary policy. I'd like to know why you think gold hasn't popped up since the president was reelected. But let's first talk about the fiscal cliff. I think everybody would agree that our economy is growing too slowly. Even if the president got all of his tax hikes in there, it would only get him $80 billion a year. That sounds like a lot, but compared to a $1 trillion deficit, it is not. That still leaves 92% of the deficit unpaid for year by year. On the other hand, if you grow the economy, you could be talking about hundreds of billions of dollars increased into the amount of money that your Treasury gets. So why would he go for the tax increases rather than tax cuts that might stimulate the economy?
He must have a different understanding of economics than you and I have, that raising taxes does not necessarily, produce more revenues. It might even hurt it. So I think they come from a different perspective. Keynesians are taught that you raise taxes if you need more money, and just because that ruins the economy and tax collections go down, they don't seem to realize that. But I don't expect a whole lot of beneficial things to happen between now and the beginning of the year, and they're just going to pass the buck on for a little bit longer and worry about the real problems later on. Like you point out, they're barely touching the problem, and even the cuts that they're talking about that would go into effect aren't even real cuts. They're just cuts on proposed increases. So we're not getting anywhere close to talking about the real issue. And the real issue is the country is bankrupt and the economy is too weak to pay for it. And someday we're going to have to wake up and do some serious changes, like actually cut real spending.
That's an interesting point, because they've done a bunch of studies, of course, recently, because so much of the microscope is focused on this, that even the spending cuts of $100 billion that they're looking at really end up being a wash when you look at the rise in expenses. The rise in expenses and inflation is just going to make the cuts pretty much dead even. So what would get us back into what we had during President Clinton, and that was a surplus?
See, I don't think we can do that any longer, and that's what I talk about when I think we're past that point or over the cliff, that just tinkering around the edges having the economy stimulated and sort of tide us over. Because I think we're past that point. I think it's much more major. It has to be structural. It has to be philosophic. We have to change our foreign policy. We have to change our monetary policy. We have to change our entitlement system. We have to admit that we don't have $222 trillion for the entitlement system. And we're nowhere close to even talking about that. We're talking about, $80 billion cut here and there. So that's why I think we'll just postpone the inevitable until a much bigger crisis comes, and that could come any time, but it'll probably come next year or so, and then we will be forced to do it because people will start rejecting the money and interest rates will crop up, and they'll quit buying our debt, and there will be no other choice but for us to face up to the reality that we're broke.
Well, one thing that we have to face up to is the enormous increase in spending that began with President Obama. I mean, he increased, first it was the $800 billion stimulus, which was supposed to be a one-shot deal, but he's carried that over year after year, and that's why we have a $1 trillion deficit for the past 4 years, including the last fiscal year that just ended at the end of September. So that $800 billion that was supposed to be a one-time shot for the economy has turned into a bottom-line budget going year after year ever since.
But it seems like the American people said, well, don't cut my spending. I want reassurance. I want you to keep bailing out the auto industry, and I want you to keep sending the welfare checks. And so it does continue. But if he thought that was, I don't believe that Obama says, I want to hurt the American people. I think it's lack of understanding of economics that he doesn't see that as a danger by keeping spending. So therefore, he's not admitting the truth about how serious this is.
We only have a little bit of time left, but we'd really like your solution to this. You said, we'll just kick the can down the road and wait for another crisis. But if you were in charge, what would start us? You said philosophical changes. You said really redoing how we look at international relations and things. Are you saying, yes, chop defense? Yes, chop entitlements?
I wouldn't chop defense, but I'd chop militarism, and I'd start bringing the troops home and get rid of the empire so that we just mind our own business. But we could change the rules with the Fed. The Congress tomorrow could pass a law and say that the Fed can't monetize debt. Let interest rates go up. And that all of a sudden would change the whole picture thing. You'd have market rates of interest, and the market rate of interest is very, very important interest, but we don't have that. We had all these bubbles form because we had artificially low interest. We have artificially low interest now. Banks get all this money for free, and they put it back in the Federal Reserve. So everything is artificial. So I would say restore the market, sound money, cut this overseas spending, and go after the entitlement system. But nobody's ready for that. Neither side is ready for that. And now even the Republicans are talking about not real cuts, but raise taxes.
Are you buying gold?
Oh, I've sort of done that for a few years. I started when it was $35 an ounce, so I don't know if I'm going to quit yet.
Thank